Hey there, all you creepers and reapers. Welcome to another episode of the Femme Fatalities. I am your co-hostess, Anna, and I am here with...
Lance, it's Margaret, and I hope you're ready for today's cast. You might have to listen very carefully and don't say a word. Anna, what are we talking about today?
We are talking about A Quiet Place. And so we're primarily going to be talking about day one. It just came out. We both have seen it. And then we'll also be talking a little bit about the other two films as well. Before we get into it, just some triggers, of course. We're talking about all of the films. So child death, monsters, wooded areas, desolate cities, destruction, cats. If you know, some people don't like cats. There's a cat in the day one movie. Illness, hospice care, palliative care. Yeah, what else? I feel like I'm missing a couple things.
Terminal illness, yeah.
Oh, hearing impairment, as well. Yeah.
Hopefully we got it all. I think.
Mm-hmm.
If we forget, we'll throw it in there.
Yeah, we'll just say, oh, by the way.
Yeah.
So this is fun because I saw the movies in order as they came out, whereas Margaret saw day one and then the other two in the timeline order rather than the release order. So I think it'll be a lot of fun comparing perspectives on the movies.
Yes, definitely. So, in comparing perspectives, since you saw them in order of release, do you have a favorite?
You know, I really liked A Quiet Place, so I guess like the middle one sort of, even though it was the first one that came out. I and once again part of it, and we've talked about this before, you have like a visceral connection. I love that our protagonist turns out to be the daughter who is also hearing impaired. I love the fact that someone who is hearing impaired played her. For me, like having hearing issues, it was really great. But I think that the way they did it was incredibly clever as well. I think the concept of the film was a lot of fun. I think the fact that it was so new and different when it came out is really why it's one of my favorites as well. The other two are great. I mean, not far from first place is day one because I really enjoyed how it was done. I enjoyed that the characters had nothing to do with the characters in the other two films. I thought that was very clever. What about you, Margaret? Do you have one that stood out more than the others?
And I love, like you, that they used the actress that was also hearing impaired. I thought that was just, it added so much texture and richness to the movie. So I agree. I'm going to have to go with day one. As a thanatologist, oh my gosh, I was like, this is a movie about grief. This is a grief movie wrapped up in an apocalyptic film, and I loved that, and I loved the actress. And if a movie, I don't cry a lot. Some listeners will know that. So if a movie makes me want, like, there was a few times in that one where I was just tearing up, and I was like, oh my gosh, she has refound her love of life. She has refound her purpose. She has, and for those of you that have lost people to terminal illness, this movie might hit home more because it really is about her journey. She's given up on life and she refines her love for life. She's grieved her life and the loss of her father.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this film in particular, it's great. You're right. It is a complete grief movie. We take this person, Sammy, right? That's our character. And like, she's done. She's over it. She knows this is heading towards the end. And your life is ending. Some force way beyond your control or anyone else's has interloped, and you find your will to live again. And it's beautiful. It really is. I think that it's a huge love letter to anyone in the grief industry, I think that if you are a thanatologist, you work in hospice, you're a funeral director, you do anything in the grief or bereavement industry, see this movie. See this movie. It's beautiful. It really truly is. I thought it was great. It's like it really is to me. It's a love letter to grief and bereavement and making meaning out of something, because really, how often do we have news that will forever impact the trajectory of what we thought our lives may have been or were going to be, and we lose sight that you can still find beauty in life. You might have to repurpose yourself, repurpose your thinking, do all sorts of things and all sorts of work, but there is still beauty out there.
And finding that beauty, and also the connections that we make. Sammy and Eric's relationship. Eric wants to live. He is dedicated to living.
Mm-hmm.
Sammy, and how they're able to connect and share these laughs, and how Eric is able to really to be like, okay, like,
mm-hmm.
I got you. Like, let's go get the slice of pizza
Yeah.
that you want so badly. And I loved that too, because so often at end of life,
Mm-hmm.
people just, they're looking for that thing to like complete their life journey. And for her, it was, I just want pizza. I just want a slice of pizza in Harlem. That's all I want. For
Mm-hmm.
her to, it was her purpose, and that was supported.
Absolutely. And I love the ending too, because, and we've talked about this before, you know, in ancient Egypt, taking control of the end was seen as a positive thing, right? Um, and when she is listening to the music and she unplugs the headphone, like, she's ready to go and she's making this decision about that. You know, maybe not being eaten by like a big creepy monster is like how we want to go, but she knows, like, she's like, okay, I'm done. It's time. This is it. And you know, how many people are really afforded that? You know, not many. And I thought that was really beautiful.
I agree, as you're touching on her having that choice, and the very controversial medical assistance in dying. It feels like that, in a way, is
Mm-hmm.
her doing that. She's getting control. She is terminally ill. She's in excruciating pain. We see that in the hospital when she doesn't have her pain meds. And to be able to say, I get to go out on my terms, instead of the cancer killing
Mm-hmm.
her when she's ready, she gets to say she's ready. And I feel like that was just beautifully done. Like Anna was saying, it was just very touching. And even how she's ready when, so again, spoilers, she helps Eric when he's like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not ready. I need to
Yeah.
get on this boat. And she's like, take Frodo. Oh my God, I
Mm-hmm.
love this cat. The
Yeah.
cat was so great in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And so she is sacrificing herself. She lives through that to then finish getting her closure. And that often, in terminal illness, so often people need that. What do they need to close so
Mm-hmm.
that they can say goodbye peacefully?
Absolutely. And Frodo, I agree, it was great. I feel like Frodo was kind of a jerk at times too, but in an endearing way. And I loved it. It did kind of bum me out though, because like, okay, we both have dogs. And I'm like, man, if these like noise enhanced critters came, like my dog and I, we'd be toast in a minute, because she's extremely protective. She would be barking up a storm, and of course I'd be trying to like gather her, like, no, no, and that would be that. What about you? Do you think you'd make it through the beginning credits, or
Because of my dogs, and also have a cat. So I feel like when you're like, Frodo's a jerk, I feel like cats can just be jerks. So I feel like
yeah.
my cat, they're like, oh, these aliens kill because of sound. Well, I'm just going to meow really loudly, and then you'll be dead, and I'll just go about my little happy kitty life and
Yeah.
go do things, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, and it's funny the difference too between like the animals. Like, we domesticated dogs, but like cats domesticated themselves. And I think that's a big difference. But yeah, it's funny too, because we don't realize until you see a movie like this how much, as someone with partial hearing or full hearing, we rely on the sounds around us, and what that means and what that indicates and how that gets us through the day. Um, I do wonder though, there were a few things with the day one that we'll probably get into in a few minutes, but I, I do wonder like how people so quickly were able to figure out that it was sound, because it was like, I feel like the first movie that came out, which is actually like the second one, um, it seems like they had been in the woods for a long time. You know, it's hundreds of days, this and that, and they know that it sounds so. Like, I had the impression that like a very substantial amount and time period of trial and error was utilized. But then we find out, like, right after the alien invasion and attack, that people are starting to figure this out already.
That's a great question. And they don't really go into that because I was wondering, right? Because she has the hearing aid, and we know that dad is really trying to like make this like a major super hearing aid. I was wondering, how did it not get discovered before other hearing impaired people that might already have like a souped up hearing aid or something to notice that? Because hearing aids do that, they make that feedback sound. It wasn't discovered earlier, or maybe it was, and she's just into the first one to say this needs to get out there. People need to know that this is a way to protect yourself.
Absolutely. Well, and I think, part of it too is that, it's not being able to hear if there's something going on around you and the aliens, monsters are there, you're not going to be aware until it's too late because you don't have hearing. Which, is very unfortunate in this universe for anyone with that sort of impairment. Even, even if you have, all of your senses and you don't have any assistance, it's going to be really difficult to acclimate and adjust in this sort of environment. The water thing, though, I'm like, why didn't they just chase them all into the ocean then? That seems
I was
logical.
wondering that too.
Yeah.
If they can't swim,
Yeah, just get them all in the ocean and let the sea creatures eat them.
Yeah, maybe it's just that like these aliens use just right that element of surprise, so then people aren't communicating. People aren't like, if we look at signs, right, we learn that they don't like water, and so that's able to be broadcast because the aliens haven't been as destructive. The aliens in A Quiet Place seem maybe smarter and like taking out like major communication, that they're really making it hard for people to, and that like blitz, like it's so chaotic in that beginning scene of day one where she is discombobulated everybody, and then and I feel like the movie reflects on that, like, oh my gosh, what's happening, and that how do we figure this out in that community that's just trying to survive?
Absolutely. And grief can feel a lot like that. Chaos and trying to survive. That did remind me of one other trigger that we didn't mention. September 11th, if that is a trigger to you for any reason, do not watch day one. The primary setting is New York City. I really want to comment on that in a few minutes, but yeah, don't watch it.
Yes, I totally agree that, and I even wondered that for people, survivors of 9/11 that have gone to see it, was that activating for their trauma? Because not only is it New York City and it's loud and it's chaotic, there are also military helicopters and vehicles, so it emergency vehicles, so it very much, like Anna was saying, mirrored 9/11.
Yeah, and I do think for me that that's kind of my one piece of feedback about the movie. I feel like maybe the setting was chosen on purpose for some of those reasons. I feel like it was in poor taste because of the history with New York City, and obviously no alien attack or invasion, but similar events happening. Like, I just feel like, New York City, Oklahoma City, a few other locations we can name would not have been the best selections due to historic events that had taken place. That's just my opinion. But then again, I mean, New York City is like central to everything, even though it's over here on the East Coast, you know what I mean? LA and New York are things that people think of immediately when they think about the United States.
Yes, and that's what I was wondering. Is I agree with you. Like, New York was a very interesting choice given historical events.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like you said, and it's still like New York just seems like the heart
Mm-hmm.
of the United States. And so going after the heart.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious, I don't know about the director or the story writers, right? Because for her whole thing is to go home, to
Yeah.
go back to Harlem. That is where
Mm-hmm.
her heart is, where there's this rich jazz history, and her dad
Mm-hmm.
played the most beautiful piano, and she's a poet. And so I was like, oh, I wonder if it's New York because it's tapping
Yeah.
into that history of her dad and jazz and her going home again. And again, for thanatology, how we go home before we die, and how so many people that are afforded, not the people that died traumatically, but people
Mm-hmm.
with terminal illness, it's this journey of how are they getting home again.
Exactly. Well, and also the setting, I mean, New York State, within an hour, you can be in the country, very secluded. You can be in a huge city that's bustling. And, that's something too that I'm wondering, these aliens that are attacking, maybe they were strategic. They're choosing a very small but densely populated area as, the first place that they're going to, to see, I guess, what these humans are about, maybe. Um, their hearing is extremely advanced. We can only imagine that their intellect may be advanced as well, although their behavior is quite impulsive and destructive, or so it seems to us, as humans.
Ooh, I never thought of that, that like they chose New York as kind of like the first one. I guess I made the assumption that it was kind of like Signs, and it was all these different like alien ships that
Mhm.
strategically went over places and just blitzed like the whole
Mhm.
planet to just disrupt everything so that people, and again, going into thanatology and how Anna had touched on earlier, so often people can feel blitzed. They go to the doctor, and the doctor's like, well, you have this terminal illness, you have this. Or even if it's not a terminal illness and it's something that impacts us, that could be chronic illness, that grief that we experience when we feel blitzed, we feel blindsided with
Yep.
some news that, if we look at the aliens, that we hear,
Mhm.
right? So we're hearing this, and maybe the luxury that our protagonist in film 1 and 2 has, that she doesn't have to hear this, and yet she has to witness all of it, and she has to be more creative in how she survives because she doesn't have that, the
Absolutely.
luxury of hearing.
Yeah. Well, and I think too that, so she's adjusted, right? She's like, okay, I'm hearing impaired. This is me, whatever. But her father is so determined to give her her hearing. And I think that really says a lot about our society as a whole. Like, oh, you're hearing impaired. I'm so sorry. But it's like, okay, well, if someone is born with some sort of, impairment when it comes to their hearing, or it's something that develops very early in childhood, this is all that you've known. That's just part of who you are. So once again, perception is reality. And Um, you know, to me, it may not be a big deal because I'm used to it, but to another person who's never experienced it or been around it, it could be a huge deal. And I think that's a huge social comment as well of really when you're looking at even the nurse practitioner guy who like leads the hospice clients as they go on their bus trip. He's just like happy-go-lucky, trying to make sure everybody's having a good time, living the life that they have left. They're even in group session, they're able to joke about like some things that most people outside of the hospice realm or even death industry, I would say, or gerontology industry, would find to be quite repulsive. And it was funny because as she was reading her word jazz out loud in the group, there were like 5 people that laughed, and I was one of them. And I'm like, okay, yeah, you probably work in the ER, you probably do this. Like, I'm coming up with all these careers,
Yes.
because you kind of know, you can spot each other in the crowd. Um, but it's interesting how we develop different languages with those that we're surrounded by, and how we can relate.
Yes. And I appreciate you bringing that up because that's so true. Like in that group where she's, he's like, "Did you write a poem?" And she's like, "Whoever smells like shit and so shit his pants," or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is. And that it's funny.
Yeah.
And even the group's laughing. And like you said, people that haven't been exposed to that are not going to find that funny. And
Yeah.
I want to track back to like dad and how dad really is like, "Oh, my child can't hear. How do I give her something she
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have?" Right. That like he sees it as a deficit. As
Mm-hmm.
a parent, I saw that as, how do I protect my child? How do I take care of my child in a world that my child needs to hear and my
Mm-hmm.
child can't hear? How do I protect my child when I can't protect my child?
Mm-hmm.
And I saw like what he was doing was really out of protecting her. And so
Oh
like
yeah.
perspective is fascinating, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah.
we see things like everybody is allowed their perspective.
Mm-hmm. Well, and speaking of perspective, developmental perspectives are really important. And when we look at the father-daughter dynamic in A Quiet Place, she feels like he blames her for the death of her little brother. She has this tremendous amount of guilt, whereas her parents have a deep grief and sadness. And they're not projecting that onto her. However, she can feel the sadness and she's projecting these emotions onto herself. Part of that has to do with her, I would say she's like pre-adolescent, maybe the beginning, like stages of adolescence. So it has to do with her developmental thinking, and also, if she wouldn't have given him the rocket ship, he wouldn't have tried to grab the batteries and those things wouldn't have happened. But also towards the end, when her father signs to her, like, it's not your fault, I don't hold this against you, or, whatever he says, something to that effect. Parents, if you are out there listening, grandparents, aunts, uncles, family, friends, it is important to talk to children about death, because what we're projecting during our own bereavement and grief experience, kids are going to pick up on, and they may blame themselves for that. They may have impacted self-esteem. All of these different things are going to be experienced if we do not take the time to talk to children about death and change and what happens. It is a normal part of life. It is going to occur over and over and over again. It is something that you need to talk to your children about.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. And I really appreciate how you talk about developmentally and being able to talk about grief with children. And you also touch on, this is a traumatic loss for the whole family. And the movie does a wonderful job of really showing that when we have traumatic grief, we often blame ourselves. We often go back. We see her journey
Mm-hmm.
through it. If I hadn't given my brother the rocket ship, he would not have died. I'm guessing dad too, if I had just left the rocket ship at the store, and mom too, if I had just carried him. That's what happens when we lose somebody sudden and tragically. We are replaying, and often we are finding guilt because we can see where we could intervene. And this is where therapy, counseling is so vital. And Anna and I are here to remind you, hindsight is 2020. We can see where we could intervene after the fact. We didn't know that in the fact. So that intervention is not available to us. We can just beat ourselves up. If I had, I didn't, because that wasn't what was available. And so being gentle with yourself, like we see with our protagonist, she's not gentle with herself. She blames herself. And because her parents are grieving and mom is pregnant and brother is sick, there's really not any emotion available to really have these conversations. Say it's not your fault. And I love you. And we're in an alien invasion.
Absolutely.
We can't prevent that.
Definitely. And I think part of it, given the environment and circumstances, it's a little bit different. But when we really look at, as adults, how do we connect in this everyday Western world to services and supports that ensure we are able to navigate our own grief journeys so that we can assist those around us, whether they're other adults, children, even our pets, do so. Because if we're not able to do that, there are long-lasting repercussions and consequences of unintentional behavior. So with that, just some suggestions. If you are going through a grief journey or something is going on and you're concerned about yourself, you're concerned about those around you, a mixture of the two, reach out to your local hospice. A lot of local hospices have complimentary bereavement support services to everyone within the community, not those that were solely served by hospice. You can call 988. They are available 24/7 with some anonymous type situations. You don't have to call and identify yourself. Your local mental health organizations are great places as well. If you currently are a college student, contact one of your counselors, contact the counseling office. If you were in high school, guidance counselors are great resources to start with as well. Margaret, I know I'm probably missing a couple. You're really great with like the online resources to connect to. Any sites that kind of pop into your mind right away?
Yes, and we will put this on our podcast description. And I believe if it's not, I'll double check on our Instagram. Inclusive Therapist is a wonderful website to find a therapist that is very BIPOC driven, oriented with BIPOC therapists for BIPOC people. They're vetted. Then there's Therapy Done, who is also BIPOC friendly, driven, as well as LGBTQIA plus affirming. So I would say those two sites. If money is an issue, there is, I just had it in my head and it just left my head. So it will be in the resources if I remember through the rest of this cast. I will let you know, but there are resources out there.
Absolutely. One thing we have not really talked about, we've talked about A Quiet Place where we make our discovery about the daughter. We've talked about Day One, which is just marvelous as well. We have not talked about the other film, which technically is the last one, but came out as the second one. For me, I think that that's the most dystopian of all of them, because we go from like trying to create meaning and have some sense and form of community to like survival mode. Like individuals you come across or groups you come across, they are not your friends. They are not here to help you. And that to me is a lot different because in day one, we see the survivors at the theater there trying to help each other. They come together at the end. Many of them are on the boat. Like, I love when the cat is there and like the little boy is there and you're like, oh my gosh, because they bonded in the beginning. And of course we do have the elderly couple in a quiet place where the woman has been attacked and did not survive the alien, so of course the man can't live without her. He's grieving and makes a noise and he gets scooped up, but that's his decision towards himself. It's not like, oh, there are people trespassing on my land, I'm gonna have the alien kill you. It's nothing like that. Whereas
Yeah.
I feel like the other one, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. As you
Oh,
feel the other one is.
it's more of like this is mine, get out of here. And why, to me, it's like, why are you fighting for this? There aren't that many humans left from what it appears. Like, you got to stick together.
I feel
And
you touch on how that brings up that scarcity in the beginning.
Mhm.
It's that community. We're all in this together. What are we going to do? And then as the days prolong and food gets less and resources get less, people get greedy. Well, this is
Mhm.
mine. I don't have enough to share. You're just going to have to go out there and fend for yourself, except for the island in a
Mhm.
quiet place. Too, like they're trying to get to this utopia,
Yeah.
but first we have to get through those people that are basically like, well, we're gonna
Mhm.
use you and abuse you because you have what we want. And
Mhm.
we it's almost like people lose respect for life except for their own life, which can
Mhm.
also mirror society, how people can be that way. I respect my life, I don't respect other people's
Yeah.
lives. And that can be really hard to witness because some of us are like, all life is deserves respect
Mhm.
regardless. Life
Yeah,
is
like it's a
needs
life.
to be respected. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really is. It almost seems like that's an underlying tone in a lot of these post-apocalyptic type themed films. I mean, even if you look, when we did a podcast about the original and the remake Dawn of the Dead, you have survival groups and then you have pillage groups. And it's very interesting. It speaks so much to human nature and reactivity. And I think we all like to think how we would behave in a scenario like that, but really until you're in it, you don't know. Which is very similar to grief, right? Like, if I lose someone or something that's very important to me, or even part of me, I hope that I behave in this manner, but there's no way to accurately predict what our behavior would look like until we're in that position.
Thank you for reflecting on that and reminding people we don't know how we're going to,
Yeah, and
and
that's
how maybe
okay.
when we think about humanity, if we don't know how we're going to react, how do we get back to
Hmm.
how do I want to be treated? And how
Absolutely.
do I treat others how I want? And like Anna was saying, a lot of post-apocalyptic films touch on that. The people that actually are like, no, wait, we're humans. We need to work together. And
Hmm.
then the people that are like, no. And that conflict, that anger, I think a lot of post-apocalyptic movies do a great job of showing that conflict between people that it's us versus them.
Hmm.
And the other people like, well, let's figure out a way to like make this work.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And really, when you think about it, um, on a much smaller scale, when you're grieving, it feels like the end of the world. It feels like your own personal apocalypse, right? And sometimes it can become like a me versus them or us versus them type of situation, not intentionally or with pre-planning, but when you're having someone, support you, then it's like, okay, it's us versus everything else. But on the contrary, if you're finding that your supports are lacking or not there, a lot of the time hyper independence is a strong result of that, right? So you've got people in your life that everyone in society says you're supposed to be able to rely on, whether it's like a spouse, a parent, a sibling, a colleague, a best friend, whatever it is. And it turns out that that person maybe doesn't know how to be there for you. They're busy with other things in their life. Um, Maybe they're just selfish. I mean, whatever the situation is. And I'm not saying that maliciously. I'm just trying to be as matter of fact as possible. That can often kind of result in, okay, well, I got to go through this alone. Might as well do everything else by myself. And, how do we get ourselves out of that, and allow ourselves to trust again? Maybe we'll be able to trust that person again. Maybe we won't. But how does that impact our ability to trust others as well?
And I love how eloquently you like touch on there are times that we are selfish, that we are guarded because we are hurt, and then you bring up Day of the Dead, and I think it's Night of the Living Dead,
Mm-hmm.
where the original, right, she is grieving. I can't think of the character's name, and how they're able just to let her be in grief, and when she kind of gets selfish and upset and freaks out, they're kind of like, okay, like let's just go ahead and we're gonna help calm you. We're gonna help do this. And it's like they honor her selfishness because they know she's grieving. And that feels like often the difference between my survival is more important than your survival, than, oh, you're grieving. And right now, everything is so raw and so tender. Your body feels like it's covered in like a million paper cuts and the world is lemon juice.
Mm-hmm.
How do you find the community that helps to be like, okay, let me buffer you. Let me put you in a bubble. Let me understand that right now you're just in this space that you can't show up how you might have.
Absolutely. That's very, very well said. And it's important. And you have to, it's hard. You have to identify people. Not everyone is gonna, show up for you. And sometimes you kind of have to initiate contact too, which is really hard, especially when you're grieving. Um, it's, I think everyone has their kind of predisposed ideas and in these behaviors that we fall in and out of. And it is really hard, I think, because during grief, and let me know your thoughts too, we're already so down that even if we're go-getters, when we're not grieving, it's really hard to say, hey, I need this. And it's, I don't want to say it's easy, but sometimes falling into the way of thinking of, this person isn't here for me. They obviously know I need them. Like, where are they? Can make it even more difficult.
Oh, yeah. Well said. Grief is just a very difficult and uncomfortable place to be.
Mm-hmm. But the good thing is that we can focus on those that are there for us, even if it's one small act. If it's a friend who lives across the world but sends flowers to the funeral, or sends you a basket of food to enjoy and not have to worry about cooking, it's because they care. And it's not what they're sending, it's the message behind it. I know for me, one of my best friends, we've known each other since we're like 4 years old, drove cross country just basically to give me a hug and make sure I was okay. We all have those people.
Beautiful.
Yeah, he's probably listening to this. You know who you are. I love you. You're stuck with me as your bestie till forever. But no, he and I have been through a lot, and I'm just so thankful to have him as a friend, and focus on the ones that will drive across the country to give you a hug and make sure you're okay. It doesn't matter if they're a friend, they're a family member, they're a colleague, a spouse, a stranger on the street who gives you a high five. Like, someone out there is planning to make your day better, and you might not even know it yet.
Yeah. Lean into the people that are there to love and accept you, regardless of where you are.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And don't just focus on getting to that magical island, like in the quiet place. Focus on the journey too. It's going to be hard. You're going to meet obstacles. but you're also going to encounter some pretty amazing things throughout the path.
That's what day one reminds us of.
Mm-hmm.
The journey.
Yeah.
So who do you most relate to?
Oh my goodness, that's a good question. I have to say Frodo, probably of all the movies, because yes, I'll go do my own thing and I might act disinterested sometimes, but really it's for everyone's good and I'm trying to bring people together. That's that, yeah. And that's for me was, yeah, I definitely Frodo is the character I identify with. How about you?
Say Eric, somebody that's just there and then like, how can I support you? What can I do for you? Okay, what do you need? And just showing up and really just being there, just accepting Sam where she is and just wanting to be part of that story and not fighting her on it, just being there and being like, okay. Maybe even right in the beginning where she's kind of like, leave me alone. And he's just kind of like, we're alone and I see that we need each other. So I'm just going to keep kind of just following you until you're just like, fine. Like that
like
tenacity. That's kind of like, okay. Yeah, he's like, no, I don't know what to do. And you're another human and I want to be around you.
Yeah, exactly.
Even if you don't want to be around me or see that, because I also feel like she probably didn't want to be around herself at this point. She's like, I'm dying and I don't want to. And he's like, no, I see your beauty and I'm gonna
you still have
help
value.
you see your beauty.
Yeah. And you are excellent at reminding others that they have value, and not just in our friendship and working relationship, but really throughout the time I've known you, the way that you present things and word things, it's incredibly encouraging. And I wish there were more people in this world that were able to speak and write and express themselves in the way that you do, because it really would be such a beautiful place if that were the case.
So sweet.
What's
you are so amazing too. I love you too.
Oh,
you're Frodo, and we need Frodos that remind us of our independence and might be disinterested because maybe we're not as interesting as we think we are. And we're like, ooh, that kind of hurt a little bit, but you walking away from me and shaking your kitty tail at me was like the reality check I needed.
Right. Like, oh, this is a great conversation, but I just saw a mouse. Excuse me. No.
A reminder that we're not the center of the world.
Oh my goodness. Well, I don't know if they're going to have any more Quiet Place films or not. So this will be interesting. It might be a to be continued. It might not, but definitely a great series. I think it's a really wonderful watch. Once again, we mentioned this earlier. If you work anywhere near, the life and death type of industry, either pre or post passing, supports for family services, any of those things, Day One is just a beautiful film to see. If you are tolerant of the horror themes as well. Obviously, if horror is not for you, you probably don't want to do this. Maybe skip to the rom-com section or something like that in your playlist. But it really, it's so well done. It's so beautiful, and I truly enjoyed it. What are your final thoughts, Margaret?
Yeah, I'm with you. I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. I feel like it was, yes, it's a horror movie, but it's not a horror movie. It's really a movie about relationships. So,
Absolutely.
just wrapped up in a horror movie.
Definitely. Under the guise of horror.
Yes.
Comes true human emotion. Sidebar, Margaret and I are going to start doing like taglines for movies. No, but hey,
not me. You've got the talent for taglines. I love how you've got quick humor. You're just like boop boop, and I'm like, yeah, what she said.
I'm full of more cheese than the dairy section of the grocery store.
And that's why I love you, because you're so good at it.
So, thanks. Well, stay tuned, guys, because we have some really cool stuff coming up, more newer films and some throwbacks as well. Until next time, make sure you sip on that bruja brew, eat some coffin cookies, and have a rest during the sunlight. Bye.
Thank you for watching and listening.